The Chargers season is officially over, but not only that, it was done in one of the worst ways possible, losing 31-30 against the Jacksonville Jaguars after being up 27-0. But that's not what this video is about. And if you want to see my instant reactions, I have a video on that was released last night. But today's video, I want to answer the question and also, go a little bit more in depth into, is it time for the Chargers to clean house on the coaches as well as the general manager? So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. But let's not waste any more of your time. Let's go and get right into this. Is it time for the Chargers to clean house? Now, the Chargers absolutely fumbled the bag yesterday, losing after being up 27-0, and that is absolutely unacceptable and has brought up a lot of questions, especially among Twitter followers, on is it time for the Chargers to move on from this entire coaching staff and general manager? And, that question is a little bit hard to answer, and there's a lot of steps to going through this. So first, whom are the coaches and, staff? First off, of course, Tom Telesco is the general manager. Ronaldo Hill is your defensive coordinator. Joe Lombardi is your offensive coordinator. Brandon Staley is your head coach, of course. And your special teams coach is Ryan Ficken. So those are your coaches. How I'm going to do this is we're going to start by going coach by coach. Offense coordinators first into your, or coordinators first into your head coach, and then your general manager. And we're going to be going through, what this coach kind of has done for this team and whether I think that they should or shouldn't keep them and who could potentially replace them and how about that would occur. So first, let's start with the, most obvious answer in should they be moved out. And I think that's going to be Joe Lombardi would be the most obvious answer. Now, Lombardi has been a very lucrative subject for the Chargers for most of the year here. With many fans, including myself, been calling for his head since like week 6, saying that he should have been fired way back then, and I definitely believe that. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't fired in that situation. Now, he has done literally so much wrong. And let's fix the lighting a little bit. I think that's a little bit better. From poor player management to, bad play calls in bad situations and in just normal situations to, dragging his feet when you're up, being conservative, being too conservative. So many things Joe Lombardi has done wrong, and we saw all of that yesterday, bit by bit. I mean, conservative play, you're up 27-0. In the second half, this Chargers team only scored 3 points. He was unable to put points up. Multiple times, even when given the ball in a proper situation, he would only take a field goal because that's all he was able to do. Using players improperly in general, Austin Ekeler has been proven to be an incredible pass or receiving back as well as running back, and he barely touched the ball yesterday in the second half or in the entire game in general. Sawyer was dealing with injury, but instead of putting him back in when Foster Sarell was struggling heavily, and by the way, we saw Jameer Sawyer go back in the game after getting injured, so it's not that he couldn't have played, but instead they pull him so that he'll be healthy for next week's game. There isn't a next week's game now. Just so much stuff was going wrong all year round, and all of it nodded its head yesterday, and it's just horrible to see. The answer, should Joe Lombardi be fired, is 100% yes. I don't know how it hasn't happened already. Hopefully, even though we'll ruin this part of the video, hopefully he will be fired by the time this video comes out. But Joe Lombardi needs to go. He has drugged this team down so far with an offense with an elite quarterback like Justin Herbert, with Austin Ekeler, who has produced 40 touchdowns in the past 2 years and has become one of the best running backs in the entire league, and Keenan Allen, who has been clutch in every way possible for this team. Mike Williams, who has been an incredible wide receiver for this team, great at a 50-50 ball, a pretty good tight end core, solid O-line. The fact that he is not able to produce points-wise in the top 10 in the league is horrible, and the fact that he wasn't able to put up a single touchdown in the second half really says something about him. Joe somehow managed to kill this entire offense time and time again, even though it was built to succeed in every way imaginable. This team was 13th in scoring 8th in yards. Props on that, I guess. You're top 10 in yards. Clap it up, clap it up. But I think a lot of that comes to the players and not even the coaching. You're 3rd in passing yards. Justin Herbert is so elite, and he's going to get you some yards when you need it. You're 12th in passing touchdowns. You're 30th in rushing yards. You're 15th in rushing touchdowns, so at least you're getting some touchdowns even with a bad run game. You have the 17th ranked red zone touchdown percentage, which means you're not scoring above average when you're in the red zone. You're kicking field goals more than anything, or not even scoring at all. You have the 17th most sacks allowed, and that's a little bit hard to put on the offense coordinator. Of course, you do drop the blocking scheme schematically for the team, but I mean, this offensive line was doing amazing through the first half of the season. You do have to give Joe Lombardi props for that if you're going to give him, say that he did bad when they started doing bad. So, yeah, he literally killed this offense, and there's no question in my mind whether Joe Lombardi should stay or should he go. He needs to leave. Now, who to replace him? Well, I think one good option here would be Frank Reich. He was the Colts head coach. He was fired, removed. Jeff Saturday took his position. Now, you might be thinking, maybe that's not a great call, especially because of the fact that he was just fired from the Colts team. But a great way to look at this, he was fired as the head coach. He was unable to organize everything to work at the same time. But when he was the offensive coordinator, and by the way, he was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, they went and won a Super Bowl even after they lost their starting quarterback in Carson Wentz. They still won with Nick Foles. And Frank Reich was your offense coordinator in that situation. I do believe Frank Reich had maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe more than that, with this Chargers team already. So he has some familiarity with this team. I think that could be a great offense coordinator filling role. And I think that happens in 2 different scenarios. Either, if Brandon Staley is able to stay, I think you could still bring in Frank Reich, and that could still work. And also, potentially, our next topic here is Sean Payton, if he becomes the head coach, I think could also potentially bring in Frank Reich or someone else. So, Sean Payton is, of course, the, highest priority in most Chargers fans for coaches, and also a really, big surrounding of this entire team is if Sean Payton's going to be the coach or not. And I think if Sean Payton comes in, he's probably going to clean house on everybody, coaching-wise, and bring in all his own pieces. So whomever he decides to bring in also. But Joe Lombardi has to go. No matter who's head coach next year, Joe Lombardi has to go. It was abysmal. And the fact that he isn't fired yet just is so aggravating. I mean, if I was in a position to fire Joe Lombardi, I would have fired him like week 5, week 6, whatever time that period that was. But I think I would have fired him, not let him back on the plane, and tell him to get his own ride back, because it is horrible. But next topic here will be your defense coordinator, and that's going to be Ronaldo Hill. And Hill's a very tough coach to kind of figure out here, because he wasn't actually calling the plays. Brandon Staley, the head coach, was calling the defense plays. So it's kind of hard to judge how Hill was doing. I think his fate lies primarily with Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley stays. I think Hill likely stays as well. Maybe Brandon Staley moves on from him, but I think they work pretty well together. And if Staley leaves, Hill 100% leaves. That's how I see it, no matter who the head coach would be. Now, like I said, it's really hard to judge how well Hill did. This defense was very inconsistent, but I think more than anything that kind of goes on Staley more than Hill, even though Hill's a very important part of this defense. So it's hard to judge him and give you a little bit more in-depth information. So I'm just going to move on to who could replace him if he is moved out. If Staley's out, it likely means Ronaldo Hill's out, which likely means you're either bringing in a guy like Sean Payton or hopefully another offensive-minded coach, and they'd bring in their own guy. Now, Payton already said that he will be bringing in Vic Fangio, would be his defensive replacement, which is, I think an amazing defense coordinator for this team. Let's read off some things here. He led the 49ers defense to a league-high 35 turnovers in 2011. That's an incredible number. You're going to win a lot of games when you have that many turnovers, because you're going to be in the better portion of games consistently over and over. Now, yes, the Chargers lost with a +5 turnover ratio last night, but that's not something that's going to happen consistently. And I think Vic Fangio wouldn't have let even though the offense is who I blame for like Joe Lombardi and the offense not scoring is who I blame for the loss last night, I don't think Vic Fangio would let that happen, that collapse occur. Plus, Brandon Staley comes from the Vic Fangio tree, so if you like what Brandon Staley brings, but you want to see a little bit better and the same schematically set up, Vic Fangio is your perfect filler for if Brandon Staley were to move out to keep the defense very, very similar. And I do think the defense worked for the most part for a good year. Vic Fangio also coached Ray Lewis as the linebacker coach with the Ravens. He was the defensive coordinator when the Panthers were brought into the league, and the Panthers made the NFC Championship in year 2, and Vic Fangio was your linebacker coach for that team and was a huge part of that. And he was also the Saints linebacker coach from 86 to 94, coaching the Doom Patrol. If you know who that is, you know how great that group of guys was. If you don't, let me give you some stats real quick on the Doom Patrol. They were top 5 defense for the entire time that Vic Fangio was there in yards, scoring, sacks, and takeaways. Vic Fangio has a huge resume behind him, and every single place he's gone has gone really, really well, except for when he was a head coach, it didn't go so well. But head coach versus defense coordinator are very, very different subjects here. Or potentially, if Sean Payton is not your replacement coach, or if Brandon Staley decides to move on from Ronaldo Hill himself, there's a couple other defense coordinator options, but I definitely think Vic Fangio is your best option. And I really just don't see this team moving on from Brandon Staley unless you're getting a guy like Sean Payton. I just don't see it. Now, there are a couple other options that we're going to talk about a little bit here, but I think that's the most likely option. And I'm not so sure who the other offensive coordinator positions could be for the Chargers team. I just haven't looked too far into it. I mean, the game just happened yesterday. Whether this video is released on Monday or Tuesday, I'm not so sure, but the game just happened yesterday. And, there's a lot on my mind. I don't have a ton of energy still, but I wanted to get this video out there. For your special teams coach, that, of course, is Ryan Ficken. Keep him. I mean, it's that simple for me. No matter who is your head coach, no matter who is any other position, general manager, doesn't matter. Keep Ryan Ficken. Sean Payton, if you come here, keep Ryan Ficken, please. He did an incredible job with the special teams. His special teams was bottom of the league for a long, long time. It was the Achilles heel for this Chargers team for over a decade, it feels like. And Ryan Ficken somehow fixed it and made this one of the strongest parts of this team. They were second in field goal percentage with a 93.9. They were tied for first with extra point percentage with 100% extra point percentage, and that's with 2 different kickers on the year, Dicker the kicker and Dustin Hopkins. You also have the 7th in return average allowed against you, so you're not getting a lot of yards returned in the kickoff game. They were, I think, 3rd in touchbacks forced, which take that as you will. I'd rather them not be at the 25-yard line, but at least there's not big return opportunities. They were the 30th in return yards for kickoff, so they weren't getting a lot of yards when they would return kicks, which isn't great, but is quickly covered up by the fact that they were 1st in return yards allowed for the punt, which they were at 56 total yards allowed on punts on the year. Nearly a full 100 ahead of the second place, and the Chargers last year and a couple years before that allowed punts to be returned for more than 56 yards multiple times in one punt. So the fact that it was 56 through the whole year is insane. They're also 3rd in punt yards for the Chargers themselves, which is really, really good. DeAndre Carter was a big part of that. Ficken took a bottom tier level special teams and made them a top 5 in the entire league. You have to keep him with, no matter who your setup is. So, there's your offense coordinators. I'm cool with moving on from all these guys and keeping Staley. I'm cool with moving on from all of them. Well, sorry. I'm cool with moving on from all of them but Ficken if Staley stays, and same with no matter who the head coach could potentially be. I think I'm cool with moving on from the offense coordinator and defense coordinator. You don't have to move on from Ronaldo Hill, but if you do, no big deal. But I think you got to keep Ficken. I think Joe Lombardi has to go no matter what. My top option, of course, for Joe Lombardi would be Frank Wright. I think that works really, really well. I mean, he was the offense coordinator for the Eagles when they won Super Bowl. And, same with defensively, I think that Vic Fangio is a massive step up. But you only get Vic Fangio if you get Sean Payton. So who, if you move on from Ronaldo, Hill and keep Staley, who your defense coordinator would be in place, I'm not so sure. But, lastly, for the coaches, Brandon Staley. Now, Staley is a very polarizing coach in all the media and for Chargers fans as well, because it's kind of been all over the place. There's been a lot of good, there's been a lot of bad. And if I'm being honest, I'm not in or out on Staley. Actually, I'm probably leaning a bit more towards I like Staley and what he's done for this team. This team wouldn't be in this great of a roster position if it wasn't for Staley. But I'm also cool and understanding of the fact if Brandon Staley is moved out, because he has done good and bad. So let's cover the good and the bad for Staley. The good, he's had 2 winning seasons. The only 2 years as head coach, he has had winning seasons. He was in the hunt. Year 1 would have made it if it wasn't for one play. And in this game, he would have moved on to the next round if it wasn't for a few plays here and there. So he has done relatively good for a brand new head coach. He brought in massive free agents, which is something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. That doesn't happen much for the Chargers. And Khalil Mack, Sebastian Joseph Day, J.C. Jackson. I think that only happens because Brandon Staley, he's found some diamonds in the rough in free agency. Bryce Callahan, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, a lot of these guys here, especially defensively, he's done a great job at finding high-level talent as well as turning not great talent into that pretty solid level talent. Bryce Callahan is a starting quarterback on a lot of teams, and the fact that he was depth on the Chargers team is insane. He showed he can run a great defense at times. I mean, he allowed 44 points in 4 games straight. That is incredible to allow 11 points per game, 4 games in a row. That is really, really good number there. He seemingly has some support from his players. I'm not sure what that's looking like after this game, but he seemingly has support, and he's a kind of a player's coach, which I do like a lot. And he's Gustos, for no better way of saying it. He's the Gustos. He's willing to go for it on 4th down and take a risk in risky situations and, go for the win instead of hoping for that overtime luck. So that's the good. The bad, he just blew a 27-0 lead in the playoffs, which is the 3rd most in NFL history. That's painful. That's one bad thing. He has underperformed in predicted wins through the year. Both years he was expected to win 10.5. This year, of course, he can't win half games, so he was expected to win 11, and he only wins 10. And last year, I think it was supposed to be 10, and he won 9. So he is playing below the odds. Now, of course, odds don't mean everything, but nonetheless, he is playing below the odds. He hired Joe Lombardi and didn't move on from him when he was failing. I think that's a huge bad thing. But he played players in unimportant games, which led to Michael Williams getting injured, which I think could have been important potentially in yesterday's game. Doesn't matter nonetheless. He showed that he is at times inconsistent on defense. Yes, he held 4 games in a row of a total of 44 points, but he also, we just witnessed, allowed 31 points in pretty much a half and 3 extra minutes. He at times allowed huge scores to poor level teams. I mean, look at the Broncos, scored big time, one of the worst teams in the entire league. They score a ton of points in that Week 18 matchup. He makes some questionable calls. Yes, he has the gustos to go for it, but sometimes it's not the right call. And, he relies a little too heavily on the analytics at times. I think he definitely got better this year, but last year it looked really, really bad where it was like, analytics, that's it. There's your good and the bad. If you want to move on from him, who would replace him? Well, the most likely option, I think, would be Sean Payton. And there's a lot of good with Sean Payton. Now, there are other options, but let's go over the resume of Sean Payton. He's proved that he can coach at a top level, already winning a Super Bowl with the Saints previously. He's used his weapons appropriately. He, turned Kamara into a top-level running back, and I think Austin Eckler and Kamara are pretty similar, where Austin Eckler will likely stay at that top level if Payton is to join the team. And Michael Thomas also turned into, arguably, for some people, a top 5, top 10 wide receiver when he was under Payton and he was healthy. I think Mike Williams kind of fits in that Michael Thomas. I think Keenan Allen could definitely stay at the high level of play that he has. If you didn't watch my awards video for the Chargers, I would highly recommend you. There was a lot of detail in there. Keenan Allen was on pace for the 6th most yards in the entire league if he would have played every game. So Keenan Allen is not on a downhill decline like a lot of people are suggesting. He would have had his best season like ever if he would have played all of his games and kept at the same pace. So Keenan Allen would have stayed at a high level. We've seen a lot of him using weapons appropriately. He had 9 seasons winning 10 or more games, which is massive. He had 11 winning seasons, 9 playoff wins, although we did have a 9-8 record, with 3 of the wins coming in that Super Bowl run and Super Bowl victory over the Colts. He has 7 divisional wins, winning the division, being the best seed in that, which is phenomenal. He has a 6.31 win percentage, which is phenomenal. He has experience for days. I mean, years and years and years. How many? I think it was like 16 or some years, probably more than that. So a ton of years under his belt. And the only bad thing is he will cost a lot of capital, a lot more capital than a lot of his Chargers fans are willing to admit, because the Saints still hold the rights to him. You're going to have to make a trade. How much is that trade going to cost? I think a lot of us want to say like a first-round pick and like a 5th. It's probably going to be at least 2 first-round picks and then some other later picks, which is a lot for a coach. And I think a coach could make a dramatic difference for this team, but that is a lot. Like, that's the difference between, losing a shot at a guy like, some people that have fallen in the Chargers' lap the past few years, Zion Johnson, Rashawn Slater. That's a shot at losing out an opportunity like some of those top guys there. If you trade this and it doesn't work out and you get a, high level pick, and then you're losing out on a shot like that. Some other options though, Eric Bieniemy, which was I think my favorite choice when the Chargers were getting a coach when Brandon Staley was coming in. Eric Bieniemy, of course, is the offense coordinator for the Chiefs. Has a lot of stuff under his belt. Worked with high-level quarterbacks, of course, with Patrick Mahomes. Has used his weapons really well with Travis Kelce, with Tyreek Hill, of course. Now working with Juju pretty well there. They're constantly a top 3 offense, even after losing Hill this year. I think they were the number 1 ranked offense in the entire league, and he has a 66 win percentage, and you get it from the Andy Reid branch. And I think Andy Reid is an incredible coach, and getting close to that point where you put him in the argument for the greatest of all time next to Bill Belichick and a couple others, like Lombardi, not Joe, because Joe stinks. Another option would be Mike Kafka. I hope I'm saying that right. He worked with Mahomes again with the Chiefs as a lower level. He wasn't the OC, but as a lower level kind of assistant there. He's currently the offense coordinator for the Giants. The Giants turned it around big time, fixed the offense. They turned Daniel Jones into a pretty decent quarterback. If you can see an improvement like that. Here's the thing here, though. You turn a decent quarterback into a good quarterback, that's one thing. It's completely different to turn an elite quarterback into, a top-of-the-line quarterback. It's very, very different to take that jump versus a jump down here. Kind of turned around Saquon's Barkley career. Seemed like he was on the decline. Turned it completely back around. I think Mike Kafka could be a good option there. He turned around, helped reinvigorate the Giants after struggling for a long time. So those are your 3 options for a head coach. I think Sean Payton's the most likely. I think depending on what the trade situation would be is about, him and Bieniemy would be my 2 favorites, but I think Sean Payton's definitely above. I'm just worried about what that trade package would look like. 2 first-round picks for a coach that's really tough for me to say, yeah, let's go do it. But Eric Bieniemy and Mike Kafka are decent options too. And then for your general manager, which is up next, is going to be Tom Telesco. Now, Telesco is a very hard case to crack because there's so many different things going to be in a general manager and so many different ways to look at this. Now, he has done a lot of good things, but he's also, once again, done just as much, bad or subpar things all at the same time. And as he approaches, I think this year was his 10th year, so as he approaches his 11th year, we've seen minimal long-term success for this team, truly. So let's look at his drafts first, because the draft is a huge part of general manager, and I think he's done a pretty solid job, but I also think that a lot of these picks that he's had have kind of fallen into his lap. So let's look at his hits, and let's look at his misses. Let's start with his hits first, while I take a drink real quick. Sorry about that. Let's start with his hits. Zion Johnson this past year, definitely a hit. We're going to go round by round. So, like, first round, second round, you understand it. We're not going year by year. Zion Johnson, hit. Rashawn Slater, massive hit. Justin Herbert, massive hit. Derwin James, hit. Mike Williams, hit. Bosa, hit. But I think, if I'm being honest, a lot of those first-round picks kind of fell into his lap. Zion Johnson slid. Slater dropped massively. Herbert, it was a flip of a coin between him and Tua. You end up with Herbert. Derwin definitely slipped. Mike Williams, at the time, some people thought was a little bit of reach. If I do recall, I might be wrong on that. Bosa, that was the most obvious pick, and you were already way, way up in the draft anyways. Next, Asante Samuel Jr. definitely hit 3 interceptions yesterday. This man, one of my favorite players on the defense entirely. I am a huge fan of Asante Samuel Jr., also known as Zont. Definitely hit. Uchenna Nwosu, hit. Denzel Perryman, hit. Hunter Henry, debatable. I'd say a hit with what he was doing for the Chargers. Not so good on the Patriots anymore. Joshua Palmer kind of turned into a hit. Funnily enough, Keenan Allen turned into a hit. Both of those were third-round draft picks, so the Chargers are pretty good at getting third-round wide receivers. Trey Pipkins, I think, kind of turned into a hit now, especially with how this year went. Drew Tranquill, hit. Kaiser White, debatable, hit. Desmond King, I'd say with what he did for the Chargers, is a hit still, although he's kind of declined since. And Jameer Sawyer, of course, is a hit. But there are, of course, some misses, and these misses are still debatable. And it's a lot harder to say that they're hits later on. It's a lot harder to say when they're misses later on in the draft because that's why they fell in the draft. It's easy to say a hit in like the 6th round when it works out, like Jameer Sawyer. But there was definitely still some misses late in the round. But for the top of the line, Jerry Tillery, definitely a miss. Jason Verrett, a miss because it was injuries. He kind of turned around for the 49ers, but now he's back on the injuries. So I'd say Jason Verrett's a miss. DJ Fluker, massive miss. Manti Te'o, technically a miss, although he looked like he was gonna be very good for this team. Man, I feel for Manti Te'o. That was an amazing documentary. I always felt for Manti. I was a fan of Manti. I'm sad that didn't work out. But, I mean, he falls in the category of a miss just based on injuries and all that stuff. Forrest Lamp, also a miss. Those are missed just from rounds 1 and 2 primarily because it's really hard to say misses from like 3rd and down. But a lot of these picks kind of fell into his lap. So even his hits aren't that big of hits because there was a little bit of luck involved. Holy crap. Somebody make sure no one's taking shots every time I said the word hit because you're wasted. Free agency. Free agency. Tom rarely spends big money in free agency. He did last year, but I think that was due in part to Staley and Herbert being on this team, getting J.C. Jackson, Sebastian Joseph Day, Bryce Callahan, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, Gerald Everett, DeAndre Carter, J.K. Scott, Dicker the kicker technically falls underneath it. Am I missing anybody else that's like a big-time free agency pull this past year? No. I think that's it. But he doesn't normally spend big-time money in free agency. I mean, if we go back prior to this year, who are his big-time free agency acquisitions? You're looking at, Casey Hayward, which definitely worked out for the Chargers, but they didn't go crazy into their pockets to get it. It worked out dramatically. Man, Casey Hayward was a dog for the Chargers for a long time. Brian Blaga reached in their pocketbook. That failed. Corey Linsley reached in their pocketbook. That's working out currently. But other than that, there's not like any big-time players that this team really went out to reach for in free agency before this year. Trades, it's really rare to see him do trades in general, with Khalil Mack probably being the biggest he's ever done. But he's made one trade at the trade deadline. His entire tenure with the Chargers, I think his entire tenure as an NFL GM, and that was in his first year with the team in 2013. Not a big fan of that. I think you need to improve your team in a situation like that. I mean, imagine if the Chargers took a little bit of risk, traded some players, traded some draft capital there at the trade deadline. You brought in that speed wide receiver. Imagine how big of an impact that could have made right now and through the rest of the year. Or they bring in, any number of options there. That could have made a huge impact this year. It could have made a huge impact with Phillip Rivers when they went 12-4. Trade deadline acquisitions can be huge. and he's not willing to do that. That's a massive negative for him, if I'm being honest. But let's look at his kind of Tom Telesco's success, if you want to call it that. Chargers only made the playoffs 3 times in his tenure with the team. 30% chance of making playoffs. That is not good, especially with Phillip Rivers, Justin Herbert now. You've had a lot of really, really good rosters, and you've only made it 3 times. They've only had a winning record 6 times, so that's a little bit over half, which is good. But with the rosters, it should be well, well above that. He's had 3 different head coaches. All had no prior head coaching experience. And it's very rare that you see a general manager get an opportunity to get 3 head coaches hired, but especially 4. I think that could be kind of something that factors into if he stays or not. 4 losing seasons, including 3 where you had 5 or less wins, which is horrible. You've had 4 seasons with a below plus minus, meaning that you were outscored at the end of the year. So 4 years, being outscored by the end of the year. He's never won the division, ever. And I know the Chiefs have been great through the past 10 years. Alex Smith was in there, and then Patrick Mahomes came in. And I think there was like one other... was Peyton Manning in here during those 10 years? I don't know if Peyton Manning was in here since 2013. I don't remember when he retired or when the Broncos won that. I think that was like 2012. So maybe he got lucky and missed out on Peyton Manning. But you've never won the division, which is horrible. Through 10 years, you never won the division. You've only had 1 season with more than 10 wins. 1 season with more than 10 wins. That was 12-4 with Phillip Rivers. That's really, really bad. And I think you've only had 1 season with 10 wins, and that was this year. And if there's one less, I guess if there's 1 less game in the year, then you would maybe had 10 wins because you wouldn't have took the Broncos game away. So I don't know how that kind of rocks out. But you've had 1 season with more than 10 wins. You've had 3 with less than 5 wins. So not very good. Tom Telesco, for me, could go, could stay. I'm not so sure. I think it kind of lies in the balance of Staley. If Staley stays, I think Tom Telesco stays. If Staley's moved out, I think then it's about 50-50 chance of Tom Telesco going out or going in. It's hard to say. His draft, although they've landed in his lap a little bit, has been really good, and that might be enough to keep him around. But you got to be willing to do some trades there. And maybe, Sean Payton or whomever comes in maybe takes a little bit of that lead and does trades like that, takes pressure off there. I could see this kind of going both ways. But, Tom Telesco has built some great rosters, but these have not been winning rosters consistently. Up to you guys. What do you think Tom Telesco should stay? Do you think any of these coaches should stay? Most importantly, lastly, Dean Spanos out. Get him out of here. Sell the team. I'm sick of it. Who to bring in? Don't know, don't care. Get Dean Spanos out. For Tom Telesco, who would fill a spot? I don't know enough about general management to tell you who should fill in Tom Telesco's spot. Don't ask me. But if you want him out, tell me who should fill a spot. But in final, holy, this turned into a long video. In final, there's still a lot of question marks. Staley, in or out, depending on Sean Payton. For me, I think a lot of Chargers fans are leaning towards him out, but I do enjoy kind of what he did because this team wouldn't have all these pieces if it wasn't for him. And I think maybe he's willing to do a little bit more in this offseason to get this team over that hump. So I'm not completely out on, Staley. I understand if you are, though. Joe Lombardi needs to be out. No questions asked. Has to be fired. If he stays on this team, clearly, Staley stayed. But if Staley stays and keeps Joe, that's enough for me to be like, whoa, what's going on here, Staley? That's enough. Ronaldo Hill, I think, completely depends on Staley. No matter whom the head coach would become, if Staley's out, I think Hill goes out as well. But Ronaldo Hill is dependent on Staley. Ryan Ficken, I think, should stay no matter what. Will he? I don't really think so because most time a new head coach comes in, they bring all of their own guys. But Ryan Ficken, I think, should stay. Tom Telesco, in or out, that I think Staley slightly depends, and there's a 50-50 chance. I think there's enough to say that he stays, and I think there's also enough to say that he goes. But that's the video. What do you guys think? Who should stay? Who should go? Is it time to clean house completely? And what's your reasoning? And who would you like to see? Primarily, if you think Staley needs to go, who do you want as the head coach? That's my main question. And Are we all in agreement that Joe Lombardi should have got fired way back when? If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. Fun fact for all you guys, I'm currently setting up a giveaway. Not sure how all the rules go. I know the number one winner will get a choice of a build poster by me of their favorite team or their favorite player in whatever sport they want. And there will likely be a gift card or two in there. And if you want to participate in that, you will need to subscribe. Should have more details within the week. But if you want to be part of that, feel free to subscribe. And as always, I hope I taught some today. I know there's a lot of information here and a lot of questions, almost more questions than answers, but I hope it taught some today. Hope it made you smile, hope it made you laugh. Something really important to me affects someone else's day in a great way, because every single day can be a great day, even if the Chargers lose after having a 27-0 lead. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.